Okay, good morning, guys. This is English 7 for Friday. We're almost to the end. This is the last day of new material for this year, and then it's just reviewing and getting ready for our final. Okay, now you have a test next week over what we're talking about, so let's go through it real quickly. First, if you have a subject and a verb, I've got a little bit of room here. I'm going to write at the bottom. Hopefully you can see this. If you have a subject and a verb sentence pattern, what do you have? You have a simple sentence. Okay? Now, you could have a compound subject. You could have a compound verb, but it's a subject and a verb. In other words, if it's compound, I might say Daisy and Venus are playing at the park, okay? So two people, Daisy and Venus, are doing something. So I have two subjects but one verb. So I still have a subject and verb pattern. Now, what if I say I have a subject and verb and I have another subject and verb. So I have a subject and a verb, then I have a conjunction or a semicolon and another subject and verb. In other words, I have a sentence here and a sentence there. They're pushed together and joined with a conjunction. That's called a what? It's called a compound sentence. Now, there's one more type that we've learned, and that is when we have an independent clause, or a what? A sentence. And we have a dependent clause. Remember, I'm going to put DC for dependent clause. A dependent clause has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand on its own because it doesn't express a complete thought. Dependent clauses are introduced by relative pronouns: who, whom, which, whose, or that. They're introduced by a subordinating conjunction: as if, although, because, since, which. Okay, those are going to be our subordinating conjunctions. We're normally going to see those clauses at the beginning of the sentence. We can find them at the end, but they're oftentimes going to be for us at the beginning. It's just going to help us to look for them, okay? If you do not know your subordinating conjunctions before the test, you need to go over them. Okay, I'm going to have a dependent clause. It's going to be introduced by a subordinating conjunction or a relative pronoun. Then I'm also going to have an independent clause. I'm only going to have one independent clause. I might have two dependents, or 3 or 4 or 10. Not really, your sentence would be too long. Okay, I might have 1 or 2 dependent clauses, but I can only have one independent clause. If I do, then I have a what? A complex sentence. If I have a dependent clause, 1 or 2, and 1 independent, I have a complex. Now, what if I have 2 independent clauses? Okay, I have 2 sentences that are squished together using a conjunction or a coordinating comma and a coordinating conjunction. Then I have a what? I have a compound sentence. What if I take my compound sentence and I add to those 2 sentences in one or the other, I added 1 dependent clause. Now I have a compound complex sentence. It's compound because it has 2 sentences joined together with a conjunction or a semicolon. But it's also complex because one of these sentences has a dependent clause in it. Let's look at what I've got it on the board. You won't be able to see all of it because the screen's too small, but you have it in your book. So let's look at your book. I'm on page 209. It says a man, well, let's go to the top first. A compound complex sentence contains 2 or more independent clauses and 1 or more subordinate clauses or dependent clauses, okay? Now, remember, the clause has to be introduced by a relative pronoun or a subordinating conjunction. Okay, so I'm going to be looking for a couple of things. When I'm looking for a compound complex sentence, I'm first looking for this pattern: subject, verb, conjunction or semicolon, subject, verb. That's going to make it compound. Then I'm going to look and see if there's a dependent clause in there. If there's a dependent clause, that makes it complex. But if it has both those things, two sentences and a dependent clause, it's compound complex. Let's look at your number one. It says draw a box around each comma and coordinating conjunction or semicolon. Okay? Because it's going to be joining two independent clauses. Okay? Then we're going to underline every subject one time. We're going to underline every verb 2 times. We're going to find the verbs first, obviously. Then we're going to put a bracket around our dependent clause. Okay, so let's look at the first one. The man who is wearing the hat is my uncle. He is my mother's brother. So the first thing we're going to look for is either a semicolon or a comma and a coordinating conjunction. In this case, we have a semicolon. So put a box around that. Okay, that's our first thing. Now, let's go through and find all of the verbs. The man who is wearing. Is wearing is a verb. The hat is, that's a verb. My uncle. He is, another verb, my mother's brother. Now let's go back and find the subject for each of those verbs. Who or what is wearing? Who is wearing? Okay? Who or what is? Man is. Who or what is here? He is. Now find your clause. Remember, it's going to begin with a relative pronoun or a subordinating conjunction. I see the word who. That's the beginning of my clause. So put a bracket. Who is wearing the hat? Now, there's my clause. So now let's look at it. Do we have 2 independent sentences? I do. The man who is wearing the hat is my uncle. That's the first sentence. The second sentence is, he is my mother's brother. So I have a subject, verb, semicolon or a conjunction, subject, verb. So I have a compound sentence. Does one of these sentences have a dependent clause in it? Yes, the first one. Who is wearing the hat? That's a dependent clause. So I have a compound sentence and I have a dependent clause. So I have what we call a compound, because it's 2 sentences, complex, because it has a dependent clause. This is a compound, complex sentence. Look at the next one in your book. It says, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. You know, God wants you to have a clear conscience between him and you. He wants you to ask forgiveness. He wants you to make things right. If you have iniquity or you have sin in your heart, things that you're not willing to get right, according to Psalm 66:18, God's not listening. He wants to hear you say you're sorry. He wants to see you turn from that. Okay? If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. Let's look at that verse. So, first, do we have a comma and coordinating conjunction, or do we have a semicolon? We do. Right here we have our conjunction and punctuation, the word but. Okay? Now, oh, am I looking at the right one? You know what? I turned to the wrong sentence. Sorry, guys. It was a good truth we talked about, but it's the wrong sentence. Look at number 2 in your book. I'll read what's on here. Jacob ate a hamburger when he was at home, but he is still hungry. We still have the word but, and it's and the punctuation. Now we have to find our what? Find your coordinating conjunction or your semicolon, then look for the verbs. Let's look at our sentence. Jacob ate. Ate is a verb. When a hamburger, when he was is always a verb, at home. But he is, and is a verb. All right, now let's go back and find our subjects to each of these verbs. Okay? Who or what ate? Jacob. Jacob ate. Who or what was? He was. Who or what is? He is. Now let's look and see if there's a relative pronoun or subordinating conjunction. Do you see one? I hope you do, because you should see the word when. Okay? When he was at home. Okay? So now, do we have two independent sentences? We do. Jacob ate a hamburger when he was home. That's sentence number 1. He is still hungry. Sentence number 2. So it's compound. Do we have a dependent clause? Yes, we have when he was at home as a dependent clause. That makes this sentence what? Compound, complex. Look at the next sentence. Heather ran a mile at the track meet, and the girl that is next to her ran the 100-meter dash. Okay? So it's kind of a long sentence, so let's go ahead and mark our prepositional phrases. Okay? At the track meet. Okay? At the track meet. I put it all the way there. All right? And let's see. To her. We have that. Okay? And that's it. So we're just trying to make it a little easier. So let's go through now. Finding our conjunction, our comma and conjunction, or our semicolon. Heather ran a mile at the track meet, and the girl that is next to her ran the 100-meter dash right here. And is our conjunction. Okay? So let's look. What are our verbs? Okay? Ran and is. Okay? Ran and is. Okay? And ran again. Okay? So who ran? Heather ran. Who is? That is. And who ran? It would be the girl. Girl ran. Okay? Do you see a dependent clause? Sure, we have the word that. That is next to her. All right? Heather ran a mile at the track meet. That is sentence number 1. The girl that is next to her ran the 100-meter dash. That is sentence number 2. Our dependent clause is that is next to her. So I have 2 independent clauses, 1 dependent clause. So I have a compound, complex sentence. Look at the next one. As the owner read a book on the porch, the cat curled up in her lap to sleep, but the dog ran in the yard. Okay? So the first thing we're going to look for is that conjunction. Do we have a conjunction or do we have a semicolon? We do. I don't know if you can see it, but way over here on the end of my board is the comma but you can see it in your book. Okay? Now, put a box around comma but. That's our conjunction. Now let's look at the verbs. As the owner read is a verb, okay? As the owner read a book on the porch, the cat curled is a verb, up in her lap to sleep. But the dog ran is a verb, in the yard. Now, for some of you that are struggling because the sentence is long, you could easily mark out your prepositional phrases on the porch and in the yard, in her lap. Okay, now to sleep is not a prepositional phrase, okay, because that's a what? That's an infinitive, okay? Now, let's go back and find our subjects. Who or what read? Owner read. Who or what curled? Cat curled. Who or what ran? Dog ran. Now, do you see any subordinating conjunctions or relative pronouns? If we can get that out. Okay, when you read the sentence, as the owner read a book on the porch, the cat curled up in her lap to sleep, but the dog ran in the yard. Hopefully you saw the word as. As the owner read a book on the porch. That is a dependent clause. Now, if you look at it, we have a conjunction, comma, but, giving us 2 independent sentences. Then we also had a subordinating conjunction or a dependent clause. That made it complex. So what do we have? Compound, complex sentence. I want you to do numbers 5, 6, and 7 before you turn the video on to part 2. So do 5, 6, and 7, then come back and watch the second part.